What's happening, folks? Back with another reaction, back with some more Pet Shop Boys. As always, big thank you to Seb for providing the material. We are getting very close to finishing this extended folder for the 1993 album Very, and I'm looking forward to the next chapter. But before we get there, we do have a couple more. And the next one is Euroboy, which is apparently the B-side to Yesterday I Was Mad. It's a single-word title. It struck me as amusing when I just looked at it before starting the video. It almost sounds like pejorative, like, oh, whatever, Euroboy. And given that they're a UK group, I realized, like, when they made this, they were technically part of the European Union, no longer, but maybe it's, like, from the island of Great Britain or the UK looking to continental Europe, and maybe it's making a comment about someone who's from a continental European country. But yeah, I don't quite know what to make of it, other than maybe it sounds a little denigrating, but ultimately it could be, you know, just a label, maybe even one that's self-applied, so I'll just have to see what I can catch on a first listen. Let's check it out. This is Pet Shop Boys. The track is Euroboy, and it's the B-side for the single Yesterday When I Was Mad, a track from their 1993 album Very. Okay, so number one, it reminds me, shout out to Joseph. He sent me an email recently and he was saying, like, oh, you've talked about how, Chris, now that I know he was sort of part of the Acid House scene and that influenced some of his productions for Pet Shop Boys, he sent me a link to Chris talking more about that background. And so big shout out to you. And I say that because this sounds like a very Chris styled dance track indeed. Like it's a early 90s dance floor banger, which is funny because again, like a lot of the genres I listened to in 93, they were just really starting to get going and wouldn't crystallize into the genres that I would first hear and start buying on vinyl when a few years later in the second half of the 90s I started going to rave parties. But yeah, this sounds like very early trance, but with a bit of a pop club sort of sound on top of it. I enjoy that. I enjoy several elements, most notably that vocal, which I don't know if that's a vocoder, but there's obviously like an effect on the vocal, like saying Euroboy, but there's parts where like we're getting a little selection of it, and that sounds very acidic. I don't think it's actually a 303, but it has a very electric, almost acid-like sound when it's like chopped up like that. Though again, when we hear the full version, it's almost like we're listening to, the Predator or something talk. It has this like monstrous quality a little bit. Neil's lines in that refrain that he kept saying, which I think had two lines to it, I couldn't hear it clearly. It was like, you are another, you are like, you want what? Like I couldn't hear those two lines clearly. And I think the Predator voice was also saying at least one of those lines, but I didn't catch that clearly. But obviously it's a very dance-driven track. I enjoy not only that acidy type of like vocoder, like vocal effect, but I enjoyed also the like shimmering like synths that were going up and down. There was like a harder like rhythmic synth which had a sort of a metallic sound. Obviously like the structure, like again, as someone who's listened to dance music for a long time, like you just get a sense for when that kick drum's going to come back, for when there's like a quick flourish before a measure break and so on. So there were a number of moments, including right at the beginning of the tune, where as someone who has DJ'd for a long time, you just get a sense for where that drop's going to be. So again, it just has a very like crisp dance floor sound to it, more than like a Neil pop touch to it. So I'm imagining this was largely from the brain of Chris. Feel free to correct me if I'm mistaken in that regard. But yeah, like I don't know if it's really making a statement. I suppose maybe it could be like talking to, like whether it's German trance parties or like the continental European rave scene in the early 90s, which again, like there's some different areas where like certain genres became very prominent, like, again, German trance parties in the early 90s. Like if you go to Rotterdam, like in the Netherlands, hardcore is just starting to get going in the way that we would later call it, gabber and so on. So I don't know if this is saying Euroboy, like you guys are, doing these things that, but again, like in the UK by the 90s, it's, the old school hardcore, which is kind of like breakbeat, often with like these keyboard lines and so on. That was certainly, well underway already by the time 93 rolls around. So I don't know if it is a statement looking toward continental Europe, but, there's not a lot of lyrics on the page, so I'm imagining if it is, it's like more conceptual. It's not like a full narrative. It's not like, a story about one particular Euroboy. At least that's not how it seemed. But yeah, it's danceable, it's rocking. As a trance enthusiast, as in like someone who, the music that I would start buying is like trance and techno and hardcore from a few years after this. Although, some of my records, like I have a Hard Floor album that's just absolutely seminal. That goes back to 93, and, there are some records I have from the earliest part of the 90s, but by and large, a lot of what I listen to is like 95 and later. Like 95 to maybe 98 is like more than half of my records. So in that regard, it sounds a bit different from the trance, that I would party to in a few years after this, but it is, of course, of particular interest to me to know, as a historian, like I'm a historian academically, but by default, and because of my personal interest, I become somewhat of a, historical enthusiast when it comes to rave parties more generally, particular genres, labels, certain stylings like within a genre, And so I find great interest in hearing rave tunes from the first half of the 90s, even if it's not a huge part of my record collection specifically. So yeah, very much enjoyed this one. Shout out to Neil, and I think in this case especially Chris. Shout out to Seb. I'm looking forward to going through. I think there's 2 more after this. Let me just check. Yes, there's Some Speculation and then Forever in Love, and at that point we'll be on to the next chapter, which in the moment I'm forgetting what that is, but I do have the zip files downloaded, so we'll be ready to go. In any case, let me know what you think of this one, and we'll be back for Some Speculation soon. Peace.